The following tools will be helpful to properly troubleshoot steering complaints: a torque wrench, a thermometer, a ZTSE 2780 power steering analyzer, and a ZTSE 4402 plug for the TRW steering gear. The ZTSE tools are available from Kent Moore. You'll also need the 333-1812K plug for the Shepherd steering gear. This is available from the International PDC. This program is designed to help you troubleshoot steering complaints, so the proper service procedures can be performed where necessary. To properly diagnose a steering complaint, it is important to understand the complaint. Talk to the driver and get specific details. When does the problem happen? When was it first noticed? Does the problem happen when the truck is loaded or empty? Also, be aware that overloaded front axles and tires may cause intermittent hard steering feel. The better you understand the circumstances, the better your ability to solve the problem. After meeting with the driver to verify the complaint as written by the service advisor, conduct a general walk-around visual inspection. First, inspect the fifth wheel to ensure that it is adequately lubricated. Check for correct tire pressures and unusual tire wear on all axles. Inspect the tie rod for damage and worn ends. Check the mounting of the steering gear for looseness. Next, inspect the U-joints and slip joint of the I-shaft for any looseness and lubricate if necessary. Also inspect the drag link for any looseness. Before inspecting the kingpins for wear and binding, disconnect the drag link from the pitman arm. Next, inspect the hydraulic system for the correct fluid level, condition, and any leakage. Discolored or burnt-smelling fluid may indicate neglected maintenance or operating temperature that is too high. Under these circumstances, it is recommended that the fluid be changed in conjunction with a new filter. Carefully inspect the power steering hoses for proper routing and condition. Pay close attention to the supply hose from the reservoir to the pump. This hose is critical and is sometimes overlooked in steering diagnosis. The hose should be free of sharp bends and in a pliable condition without being spongy. Warning: watch the power steering analyzer pressure gauge closely when closing the shutoff valve. A bad relief valve may not relieve the pump pressure and can cause pump damage or a high-pressure hose to rupture. If pressure rises rapidly or goes above 2,500 psi, stop. If the complaint is thought to be a component issue, a supply hose that doesn't provide fluid to the pump during all operating conditions could be the cause. For example, high back pressure can result when a supply hose is restricted, kinked, or closed off during high pump RPMs. This will prevent adequate fluid supply to the pump during the power steering flow test, which could cause periodic loss of power steering assist or hard steering. You must perform all tests in the steering troubleshooting checklist for proper diagnosis. Record the data on the checklist and compare the test results with the customer's complaint. Refer to TSI 02-05-01 found on ISIS to print a copy of this checklist. Warning: power steering hoses may contain hot fluid. Use care when disconnecting. Before beginning the analysis, it is important to connect and prep the power steering analyzer as follows. First, with the engine off and the vehicle level and resting normally on all four tires, Install the analyzer in series between the pressure side of the power steering pump and the pressure side of the steering gear. When properly connected, the flow meter arrow will point toward the steering gear. Fill the power steering reservoir to the proper level. Next, start the engine. Verify that both the pressure gauge needle and flow meter move in the direction of oil flow. If they don't, the power steering analyzer has been installed backwards. Finally, bleed the system of any air and ensure that the reservoir is still filled to the proper level. Since oil temperature affects the performance of hydraulic components, it is important that a suitable thermometer be installed in the power steering reservoir when conducting this test. Begin the test by first measuring and recording the temperature. Tests should be performed at system operating temperatures of 180 degrees Fahrenheit. However, if the driver complains of an intermittent problem, it may be necessary to raise the oil temperature to 220 degrees Fahrenheit for testing. To achieve this temperature, partially close off the valve on the power steering analyzer to 1500 psi long enough to raise the temperature. Then fully open the valve. Next, measure and record system back pressure. Do this by reading the pressure on the gauge with the wheels straight and no steering wheel input. Test the maximum system pressure by closing and opening the power steering analyzer valve quickly 3 times. Then record the maximum or pump relief pressure onto the troubleshooting checklist. Do not leave the valve closed for more than a few seconds. This will cause internal damage to the pump. Now measure and record the flow at idle, back pressure only. This is read in gallons per minute with the valve all the way open. Then measure and record the flow at idle with 1500 psi load applied by closing the valve to read 1500 on the gauge. Open the valve and with the assistance of a second technician to work the engine throttle, measure and record maximum engine RPM. Then measure and record the flow at idle with 1500 psi load applied by closing the valve to read 1500 on the gauge. Open the valve and bring engine RPM back to an idle when the tests are completed. With the assistance of a second technician using a normal hand-over-hand technique, have him turn the steering wheel at idle while you watch the gauge needle carefully. Record the peak static steering pressure values on left and right turns just before the pressure drops off. Next, with the engine at idle, use an inch-pound torque wrench to measure and record the static steering input effort to turn the steering wheel on left and right turns. Refer to ICEs for the horn cover removal procedures specific to the vehicle you are working on. On a Shepherd M-Series steering gear, the input effort can be as high as 80 to 100 inch-pounds of torque. Refer to TSI 92-05-03 as found on ISIS. After you complete the tests, you need to evaluate the results. To do this, it is important to understand pump specifications. Each pump is designed for specific applications and performance. Changing pumps to a different specification is not recommended without international engineering approval. In addition, each model of steering gear has flow and pressure recommendations. Refer to ISIS for the specifications of the steering gear being serviced. If pump flow is lower than the minimum for the specific gear, you could experience a hard steer condition or intermittent loss of power assist. If the test results are within specifications and the cause of the steering complaint is not discovered, you may have to perform a steering gear internal leakage test. First, check to see if the steering gear is fitted with a pressure relief valve. These will typically be found on 1000, 2000, 3000, 4000, and 8000 series vehicles. A 1 1/4 inch nut on the input end cap identifies the pressure relief valve. To properly test this type of gear, remove the relief valve and install a special plug. The plug part number for a Shepherd gear is 3331812K. The plug for a TRW gear is part number ZTSE 4402. Next, install a 4x4 wooden block long enough to fit between the tire and wheel and the chassis frame rail. This is to test the steering gear leakage at maximum pump delivery. Place the block of wood in contact with the tire and wheel evenly. Place the other end against the frame rail. Instruct a second technician to turn the steering wheel in the direction of the block. This test will bring the system to maximum pump pressure. Read the flow meter. If the flow is more than 1 gallon per minute, the gear has excessive internal leakage. To view the troubleshooting charts, refer to the appropriate service manual sections found on ISIS. For technical assistance in steering performance diagnostics, refer to ISIS for the TSI and warranty policy letters. This concludes Program 4 of the Power Steering Training Series. Completion of this educational process is a key component toward international technician certification. You are now required to take a post-test via ISIS, Education, Service, online testing.